They sized her up before she even spoke, pegged her worth in a glance. The expensive suit on black skin somehow suspicious. The check she carried too big to be hers, without questions attached. She felt the room shift, watched respect drain from practice smiles to something colder, sharper, more dangerous. This wasn't just about a transaction. It was a test she hadn't agreed to take, an interrogation she didn't consent to answer. Every condescending word, every insult delivered with that sweet corporate calm, was meant to put her in her place. But they never stopped to wonder whose place it really was. Because the person they chose to humiliate wasn't powerless. And their petty cruelty was about to cost them everything. Stick around to see how one moment of ugly prejudice explodes into consequences they couldn't control. Like what you hear? Hit like, subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments what you think and where you're watching from. Let's talk about what happens when people forget to respect the wrong person. Sabine Marshall stepped through the glass doors of Centennial Trust Branch 11 and paused a moment to let the chill of the morning fade from her cheeks. She took in the lobby with its sterile precision, polished gray floors, generic landscape art on the walls, the whir of fluorescent lighting overhead. She felt the weight of a check in her hand. $75,000. Payment for the contract she'd spent months landing. The sum was significant, but entirely legitimate. She adjusted her navy suit, smoothed the lapel with her free hand, and squared her shoulders. She was determined to handle this professionally, with the same calm authority she projected in client meetings. As she walked forward, she could feel the eyes of other customers flick toward her. She ignored them, focusing instead on the line that snaked toward the tellers. She rehearsed what she would say. "Good morning, I'd like to deposit this into my business account, please." She took her place and waited, counting the seconds, willing her racing heart to steady. But the moment she approached the counter, everything went wrong. Deirdre was already watching her, perched on her stool like a cat eyeing a mouse. She wore an oversized name tag on her uniform blouse and had acrylic nails that clicked incessantly on the counter while she finished a personal conversation with her coworker. She didn't break off immediately when Sabine stepped up. Instead, she slowly let her gaze sweep over Sabine's face, to her hair pinned in neat, gleaming twists, to her modest gold hoops, to her press suit. There was no politeness in her expression, only appraisal and then open dismissal. When Deirdre finally turned her full attention to Sabine, her smile was razor-thin. "Morning," she drawled, stretching the word with performative boredom. Sabine offered her best businesslike nod. "Good morning. I'd like to deposit this check, please." She laid it carefully on the counter. Deirdre didn't pick it up immediately. She let it sit there for a breathless moment, eyes on Sabine's face, daring her to speak again. Sabine resisted. She would not fidget. She would not look away. She needed this to go smoothly. Finally, Deirdre picked it up between two fingers as though it were something sticky, turning it over once with a flick of disgust. She lifted an eyebrow. $75,000, she said, loud enough that the man in line behind Sabine leaned forward to see. Deirdre let out a soft, derisive whistle. "That's quite a sum, huh?" Sabine swallowed. "Yes, it's a business payment. I've deposited checks from this client before." Deirdre's eyes narrowed. She flipped the check over again and shook her head. Then, making sure the entire room could hear, she sighed dramatically. "We get a lot of these lately. People printing them up at home." Sabine felt her cheeks burn. A ripple of laughter ran through the line behind her. She tried to breathe, keeping her voice even. "It's real. I have the invoice if you need it." Deirdre didn't respond immediately. Instead, she held the check up to the overhead light like she was inspecting counterfeit bills in a police procedural. She tilted it one way and then the other, squinting theatrically. "Hum," she said, drawing out the sound. "Better safe than sorry." She turned toward her colleague at the next window. "Bridget, look at this. 75 grand. She says it's legit." Bridget didn't even look up, but snickered. "Uh-huh. Good luck with that." Sabine tried to speak, but her throat closed up. She felt trapped, pinned by the attention of the entire lobby. Deirdre lowered the check and tapped the counterfeit detector pen on the counter with a loud, taunting rhythm. Then she ran it slowly over the check, watching the line behind Sabine with a smirk as though performing a show just for them. "You don't mind if I'm thorough, do you?" she asked. Sabine shook her head stiffly, unable to make her voice work. Deirdre clicked her tongue in mock sympathy. "Ah, nervous? If there's something you want to tell me, now's the time." Sabine's mouth was dry. She swallowed hard. "It's a valid check." Deirdre smiled wide, revealing 2 white teeth that didn't reach her eyes. "Sure it is." She set the pen down with a flourish, still not looking at Sabine as she typed her employee ID into the computer. She leaned over and murmured to Bridget, who snickered again. "These signatures are never consistent on these things. People think they're so clever." She clucked her tongue in mock disapproval. Sabine tried to interject, voice tight and raw. "It's the same signature I've used on every deposit. I'm a business client here." Deirdre didn't even look up. She angled the check again under the light, muttering to herself in a sarcastic tone. Business client. Sure. Must be a very interesting business." Sabine felt the words hit her like darts, sharp and deliberate. A few customers shifted closer, curiosity overcoming courtesy. The man who had muttered before let out a derisive laugh. "Yeah, business client," he repeated under his breath. Sabine's vision blurred for a moment, the humiliation sinking deep into her chest. But she refused to move, refused to let them see her break. Deirdre finally lowered the UV lamp and flicked off the light, but she didn't stop. She tapped the check on the counter as if trying to dislodge something unsavory from it, all while giving Sabine a slow, cold smile. "I just have to be thorough," she said. "We have a reputation to uphold here at Centennial Trust. Don't want anyone saying we let certain things slide." Sabine's mouth worked, but no words came. She clenched her jaw, trying to keep her breathing even. She felt like she was shrinking under the weight of the gazes behind her, as if the entire room were closing in on her. At that moment, another figure appeared behind Deirdre, tall and broad-shouldered in a navy suit with a cheap gold tie clip. Lowell, the branch manager. He crossed his arms over his chest, surveying the scene with a practiced authority that felt anything but neutral. He watched Deirdre a moment before clearing his throat, making sure everyone in the lobby turned their eyes to him. "What's the holdup here?" he asked in a tone that suggested he already knew the answer. Deirdre's lips curled in satisfaction. She didn't bother to hide the gleam in her eye as she lifted the check, waving it slightly like evidence at a trial. "This young lady," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness, "brought us this check. $75,000. Says it's for her business." She turned her gaze back to Sabine with open mockery. "But you know how these things go." Lowell snorted, not bothering to disguise the disdain. He leaned in, scanning the check without touching it, and then lifted his gaze to Sabine like he was inspecting something that had crawled in from a street. $75,000, huh?" he repeated, eyebrows raised, voice booming so everyone could hear. "That's an unusually large check for some people." The phrase struck Sabine like a slap. She felt the blood drain from her face. She managed to croak, "I have documentation. I can show you the contract." But Lowell cut her off with a raised hand, shaking his head slowly as if dealing with a misbehaving child. No, let's not make this complicated. We have procedures for this." He turned slightly, addressing the whole room like an actor on stage. "You'd be amazed at what people try to get away with these days. We're just doing our due diligence. For everyone's safety." A few people in line nodded, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the world. Sabine's vision swam with embarrassment and rage she couldn't voice. Deirdre smirked at her, now emboldened with Lowell at her back. "He's right, you know," she said, tapping the check once more for emphasis. "We can't just take anyone's word for it, especially with numbers like these, and with all the fraud we see." Ray, the security guard, shifted his stance slightly, looming closer. He didn't say anything, but the threat was there in his folded arms and the way he watched Sabine like he expected her to bolt at any moment. Sabine's shoulders slumped a fraction. She felt her heart pounding, her face hot with humiliation. She opened her mouth, closed it again. She could feel every eye in the room on her, judging, waiting, enjoying the spectacle. Lowell didn't even look at the phone she offered. He held up a hand with patronizing calm, his expression set in the patient, smug resolve of someone who thought he was explaining reality to a slow learner. "Miss Marshall," he said, enunciating every syllable like she was a child, "we've seen forged checks before. We're not new to this game. People print them up in their basements these days. It's shockingly easy, you know." Sabine felt her heart pounding in her chest. She swallowed back the hot, metallic taste of rage and fear. "I'm not forging anything," she hissed, voice tight with controlled fury. "It's from a Fortune 500 company. Look at the routing numbers. Call them. This isn't some scam." Lowell's face hardened just slightly, the condescension sharpening into open annoyance. He leaned forward, voice lowering as if to impart some final warning. "We don't want any trouble, okay? Don't make this harder than it needs to be. If there's something you need to admit, now's the time." His tone suggested he was offering mercy, but the threat underneath was as clear as glass. Sabine's jaw tightened, her eyes shining despite her best efforts. "There's nothing to admit," she spat. "It's a real check. I'm a business client. I've deposited here before." But Deirdre let out a snort of derisive laughter, turning it into a little cough as if she couldn't help herself. She clicked a few more keys on her terminal with infuriating slowness, eyes locked on Sabine with thinly veiled contempt. Hum, she drawled, drawing out the syllables like she was savoring them. "Sure, that's what they all say." Then she turned slightly, angling the check on the glass partition so that everyone behind Sabine could see it. She picked up the red void/fraud stamp from her drawer, slamming it down onto the check with a satisfying thunk that seemed to echo through the entire bank. The bright red letters bled across the pale green paper in garish accusation. "Fake." The entire line seemed to shift in unison, people leaning to get a better look. A woman 2 places behind Sabine made no attempt to lower her voice. "Knew it," she whispered to her friend, who snickered behind a manicured hand. Sabine felt her mouth drop open, shock rendering her momentarily speechless. She looked from the defaced check to Deirdre's face, which now bore an expression of smug victory, to Lowell, who watched it all with bland approval. You just destroyed it," she choked out. "That's my client's payment. You can't just stamp it." But Deirdre set the stamp down with deliberate slowness and shrugged, rolling her shoulders like she was relieving tension after a satisfying workout. "Standard procedure for fraud, Han. Can't let these things float around. Gotta stop the scam at the source." Sabine turned desperately to Lowell, hoping for even a sliver of humanity. "Please, call the company. Verify it. You have to give me a chance to prove it's real." But Lowell's face closed off even further, his eyes going cold. Lowell watched her with that same cold, satisfied disinterest, like he'd handled nuisance. When she found her voice, it cracked. "You can't do this," she whispered, the words clawing from her throat. "It's not fake. I have the invoice, the client's information. I can prove it." She reached again for her phone, desperation turning her movements jerky and clumsy, but Lowell's voice cut across the space, sharp and final. "Ma'am, I suggest you stop right now, before you make this worse for yourself." His voice dropped lower, threatening. "Because if you keep pushing this, you're going to leave me no choice but to call the police. We don't take kindly to fraud here." Sabine froze, her phone hovering inches from the counter, her fingers spasming. She could feel her pulse hammering at her temples, each beat louder than the last. The air in the lobby seemed to thin. She tried to swallow, but her mouth was dry as dust. She whispered, "Please, I'm telling you it's real." Her voice cracked again, and she felt the humiliating heat of tears rising despite her best efforts. Lowell leaned forward slightly, enough that she could see the flecks of spit at the corner of his mouth, the thin veil of control slipping just enough to reveal the disdain underneath. "If you're innocent, you have nothing to hide, right?" he said, the words honeyed but venomous. "Let them sort it out downtown. Maybe you can convince them." The implication hit her like a gut punch. He was offering to have her dragged away in front of everyone, cuffed and loaded into the back of a cruiser, her entire life flattened to one ugly, public spectacle of suspect and criminal. She shook her head, breath hitching as she tried to speak. "Please," she managed, but her voice was so small, so broken it barely carried past her own ears. Deirdre was watching her with a satisfied smirk, tapping one long nail against the counter in a slow rhythm. "Ray," Lowell said casually, like he was asking someone to pass the salt. "Stay close, would you?" The security guard shifted his weight and came forward in 2 heavy steps, his shoes squeaking on the clean tile. He was taller than Sabine by a foot and at least twice her weight. She felt his shadow fall over her as he stopped at her side, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. She turned her head and met his eyes for half a second. They were flat and impassive, the eyes of someone who didn't care what she was saying, who was here to do one thing: make sure she didn't cause trouble. Sabine's lip trembled as she tried to hold herself together. She could feel the first tears break free despite her best efforts, sliding hot and shameful down her cheeks. Ray's hand came down slowly, deliberately, settling on her shoulder like a steel trap. She jerked slightly at the contact, startled at the weight of it, the implied threat in that simple touch. She heard the hush that fell over the lobby at that moment, the sound of bored curiosity sharpening into cruel interest. Someone cleared their throat, another coughed. And then the real humiliation began. The glow of a smartphone screen appeared in the corner of her vision. Then another, then 3. She realized with a cold stab of horror that they were recording her, recording this. She saw the man who'd been muttering behind her lift his phone with no attempt at subtlety. His friend beside him whispering something she couldn't hear, but felt in her bones was ugly. Her vision blurred with tears she couldn't stop, her body trembling as she tried to break free of Ray's grip, but he held her firmly, not painfully yet, but enough to say she wasn't going anywhere without his say-so. Lowell spoke again, and though his words were addressed to her, he projected them like a public statement. "We're not interested in fraud here, and we're not going to tolerate any disruptions. If you can't calm down, we'll have no choice but to involve the authorities." Then, as if remembering the show wasn't over yet, he cleared his throat and gave Ray a short nod. "Get her out of here before she runs off," he said in a voice meant to carry. He wanted the room to hear it. He wanted them to know he was in control. Ray didn't hesitate. He shifted his grip from Sabine's shoulder to her upper arm, his fingers digging in just enough to make sure she felt it. She flinched at the contact, instinctively trying to pull away, but he only tightened his hold, leaning in close so she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Don't make this harder," he muttered, his tone low but unmistakably threatening. Sabine whimpered, her voice a cracked, broken thing. Please don't touch me. I'm leaving. I'll leave." But Ray ignored her, pressing her arm and turning her bodily toward the exit, forcing her to stumble forward a step before she caught her balance. Her heels scuffed loudly against the tile floor, the harsh sound making her wince. Deirdre let out a single high, sharp cackle that bounced off the bank's sterile walls. "Oh, don't let her bolt," she said, like she was talking about an untrained dog. "Can't have her slipping out with all that evidence." The word dripped with derision. Sabine blinked furiously, trying to see through the blur of her tears as Ray guided her firmly, not quite shoving, but leaving no doubt she had no choice. The customers in line began talking again, the low murmur building like a rising tide of mockery. One woman didn't bother to hide her glee as she turned to her friend, phone still raised. "Look at her crying," she snickered. "Bet she won't try that scam again." Another man smirked, shaking his head as if he was witnessing a child being scolded for stealing candy. Sabine couldn't bear to look at them. She kept her gaze on the floor, watching her own feet shuffle forward, one in front of the other, like she was learning to walk again. Every muscle in her body burned with shame, her breath ragged, chest heaving with stifled sobs. As they neared the entrance to the lobby, she tried once more, her voice cracking like dry timber. Please just give it back. Give me the check." Ray didn't even answer her, only increased the pressure on her arm. But Lowell's voice rose behind her, cutting off the last of her plea with a bored finality. "We can't do that," he said in a tone that suggested he was tired of explaining simple things to simple people. "That's evidence of a crime, Ms. Marshall. You can take it up with the courts if you really feel wronged." The words felt like cold water thrown in her face. Sabine stopped moving for just an instant, so startled by the cruelty of it that Ray had to give her arm a sharp tug to get her going again. Evidence, she repeated, the word barely a whisper, as if she couldn't even comprehend it. Lowell gave a theatrical sigh and spread his hands. Well, what would you have us do? Just hand back a fraudulent document so you can try it somewhere else. He chuckled humorlessly. We're not complete fools. Deirdre snorted at that, adding her own parting shot as she returned her attention to her computer screen. She'll probably be back tomorrow with another one, she said without looking up. Some people never learn. The security cameras above them watched it all impassively, blinking their little red lights. Sabine felt the stares of every customer in the room drilling into her back, felt their collective judgment pressing her down into the floor. When she opened her eyes, she forced herself to stand straight. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her collapse outside like some worthless criminal who'd been thrown out onto the street. Her fingers trembled as she fumbled for her phone in her bag, her breath hitching in tight, painful bursts. She found the customer service number saved under Centennial Trust and hit call with a vengeance that felt pitifully small. She pressed the phone to her ear, listening to it ring as she turned slightly to the side, trying to hide her ravaged face from passers-by who barely spared her a second glance. The hold music was syrupy sweet, an insult all its own, and she bit her lip so hard it nearly bled to keep from screaming. The automated voice chirped at her like nothing was wrong. Thank you for calling Centennial Trust. Your call is very important to us. Please hold for the next available representative. She let out a harsh, ugly sound, half laugh, half sob, as she wiped her face again. Her chest burned with the effort of keeping her voice even when the line finally clicked. But it wasn't a person, just more recorded words. All our representatives are currently busy. Your estimated wait time is 26 minutes. She let out a strangled cry of frustration, dropping her hand to her side and letting the phone dangle uselessly. She turned, pressing her back against the cold brick, eyes brimming with fresh tears she couldn't swallow down. Through the glass doors she could see inside the bank, every detail crystal clear like a grotesque stage she wasn't allowed to leave. Deirdre was still behind the counter, her acrylic nails flashing as she gestured animatedly. She was laughing, really laughing, her mouth wide with glee, shoulders shaking. Lowell was standing with his arms folded, his face split in a smug grin, watching her with indulgent amusement. Then, without any shame at all, he lifted one big hand and high-fived Deirdre over the counter like they'd just closed a record-breaking sale. Sabine's vision went blurry, her throat tightening so painfully she thought she might choke. She pressed her free hand to her mouth to stifle the sob that clawed its way up. She felt bile burn in her stomach. She couldn't look away, even though it hurt more than anything had ever hurt. As she watched, the line of customers began to shuffle forward again, the show apparently over. The banker next to Deirdre glanced over, eyes flicking to the door, then back at Deirdre with raised brows. Deirdre only waved a dismissive hand, grinning like a wolf. She turned to the next person in line and sang out, "Next, please. Sorry for the delay. We had to deal with riffraff." The word carried easily through the quiet of the bank, reaching all the way to Sabine outside, even though the thick glass muffled the rest. Sabine heard it anyway. She felt it like a slap. The customer laughed in polite complicity, and Sabine saw heads nodding. The entire lobby seemed to relax now that the threat was gone, the problem removed, everything back to normal. Through the glass, she saw Deirdre lean inconspiratorially to the next person at the window, her lips moving in a knowing smirk that made Sabine's stomach turn. She didn't need to hear the words to know what was being said. The laughter that followed was enough. Sabine's chest heaved, her breaths ragged, visible in the icy air like smoke from a dying fire. She realized her phone was still in her hand, the tinny-hold music droning on in her ear like an insult. She yanked it away and ended the call with shaking fingers before stuffing it back in her bag like it was something that had burned her. For several long, aching moments, she did nothing but stare at the moving reflections on the glass, watching people inside laugh and chat, going back to their pleasant business while she stood banished outside, no longer a customer, not even a person, just riffraff. The word rattled in her skull like a loose bolt. She remembered the look on Deirdre's face as she high-fived Lowell, that sick satisfaction in punishing her for daring to be here at all. Sabine sucked in a shaky breath. She closed her eyes. She wanted to sink into the pavement and disappear forever, let the cold swallow her whole. But something in her chest wouldn't let her. It was a small thing at first, a spark of something old and angry, something that had kept her pushing through late nights and thankless meetings and years of dismissive gatekeepers who had told her in 100 subtle ways she didn't belong. That spark caught the wind and grew into a steady flame. She felt her shoulders straighten by degrees, each vertebra clicking into place like she was being reassembled. Her fingers loosened on her bag. She wiped her face with her palm in one decisive swipe, smearing away the tears without a second thought. She sniffed hard, squared her jaw, and reached into her coat pocket to pull out her phone. She unlocked the screen, her thumb steady despite the cold, the tiny vibrations of her heartbeat traveling through the glass. She stared at the home screen for a single second. Then she tapped the contact she had labeled simply as exec ops. The phone rang once, twice. A calm voice answered. "Yes, Ms. Marshall." Sabine's voice cracked once at the beginning, but she forced it steady, cold, and precise. "Activate contingency protocol," she said. She watched her own breath fog in front of her face. Effective immediately. There was a pause on the line, not of confusion, but of careful verification. The voice came back low, respectful, almost cautious. "Understood. May I confirm the scope?" Sabine's eyes narrowed. She felt every last trace of humiliation curdling into something harder and sharper. "Close all Centennial Trust accounts," she said evenly. "Freeze transfers, call and debts. Move our investments out. Liquidate any exposure by end of day." Another pause. She could hear faint keyboard clacks on the other end, like the sound of a firing squad preparing. "Understood. This will trigger alerts to their board." Sabine exhaled slowly, fog streaming from her nose and mouth like smoke from a gun. "Good. Let it." Her voice lowered another octave, rumbling from her chest. "Confirm for the record. I am authorizing this as CEO of Sable and Gray Capital Partners." There was no doubt in the voice that answered. "Confirmed. You hold 51% controlling interest in their parent holding. Your instructions will be executed immediately. We will keep you apprised." Sabine clicked the call off without saying goodbye. She let her arm fall to her side, phone still in hand, suddenly heavy as lead. She took another slow breath, trying to feel every second of it. The cold that had been biting at her skin now felt bracing, welcome, even necessary. She turned her gaze back to the glass doors. From where she stood, she could still see Deirdre behind the counter, half turned to Lowell, chatting and laughing in the aftermath of her triumph. Lowell was leaning against the desk, relaxed and self-satisfied, watching the line move along like the master of his little kingdom. Sabine's lip curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. She didn't move from the sidewalk. She didn't rush back in to tell them. She simply watched. Deirdre scanned the next check with practiced flair, tapping her keyboard with those dagger-like nails. But the moment she hit enter, the screen flickered in an odd, jerky way, lines of code flashing and disappearing in a blink. She frowned. "Weird," she muttered, hitting enter again harder, as if that would scare it into submission. Instead of clearing, the system locked. The cursor froze. A bright red banner sprawled across the top of the window. "Transaction error. Account lockdown." She let out an annoyed huff. "Ugh, hang on," she told the customer with manufactured patience, but she didn't make eye contact. She tried exiting and reopening the program, but the error banner reappeared immediately, this time with a blinking red icon that seemed to laugh at her confusion. "Lowell," she called, her voice losing a note of certainty. He pushed off the counter, straightening, the bored look on his face tightening into mild irritation. "What?" "The system's frozen," she snapped. "Look at this." He moved behind her, leaning over her shoulder to see the screen. The red banner was impossible to miss. He scowled, rolling his eyes. "It's probably the network," he said, dismissive as ever. "Just reboot the terminal." Deirdre's lips tightened. She clicked to restart. The terminal shut down, restarted in a blur of company logos, then immediately crashed to black. The blinking error returned, more persistent this time. Security lockout. A low murmur rippled through the line of customers. The man waiting at Deirdre's window glanced around, uneasy. "What's going on?" he demanded. "Is this going to take long?" Lowell straightened, brushing off his sleeves, his expression now pinched and annoyed. "Everybody calm down," he ordered, loud enough for the room to hear. "We're experiencing a minor technical issue. We'll have you all taken care of in a minute." But across the row of teller windows, the same errors bloomed. Bridget's terminal let out a shrill beep before flashing red. Another teller cursed under his breath as his machine froze in the middle of a transaction. The murmurs behind the rope line turned into complaints, people shifting uncomfortably, checking their watches, pulling out their phones to text. "What the hell is this?" someone barked. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. Deirdre's smile cracked entirely. She jabbed buttons frantically, nails tapping in erratic terror. "It won't clear," she hissed. "It's not letting me do anything." Lowell felt sweat break along his hairline. He turned back to the line, plastering on a tight smile. "Just a moment, folks. Just a system reboot. Happens sometimes." But even as he said it, the main office line on the back wall phone began to ring. He shot at a glance, then at Deirdre. "Answer that," he snapped. "Tell them we're having a glitch." Deirdre grabbed the receiver with shaking hands. "Centennial Trust Branch 11. Her voice faltered. From the handset, a voice was already screaming. She recoiled, holding the phone away from her ear. Lowell grabbed it from her. "This is Lowell, branch manager," he said sharply. "What the hell is going on? We're having a little system outage here." The voice on the other end roared back, so loud the nearest customers could hear the outline of it. "Outage? Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you know who you threw out? You need to get your entire staff together now." Lowell's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" It was a fraud attempt. The voice cut in with absolute fury. "Fraud? That woman you humiliated is the chairwoman of Sable and Gray Capital Partners. They own 51% of this bank's parent company. She just ordered every single account closed. Our systems are locked because our controlling partner initiated a liquidation. We can't override it. We're done." Lowell's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "I want my money now. You people are thieves," he shouted, spittle flying. A woman with a stroller was crying, clutching her checkbook as she tried to calm her screaming child. At Deirdre Station, the red security lockout banner blinked insistently. She tried one last time to clear the screen, but the computer let out a defeated beep and went black. She yanked her hand back like it was on fire. She could feel sweat running down her back, soaking through her uniform blouse. Her mouth was dry. She heard Lowell still on the phone, the receiver pressed so tightly to his ear it was turning red, while the voice on the other end kept barking demands. His responses had lost all authority. Yes, I'm trying. No, she left. She's gone. I don't know where she went." His voice cracked. "No, I didn't know who she was." The corporate rep on the other end didn't care. The customers didn't care. The lobby had transformed into a nightmare, and there was no way out. Then the branch's glass door swung open with a hiss, letting in a blast of cold air along with two men in dark suits with corporate security badges. They were not the friendly, smiling guards who opened doors for elderly customers. These were hard-faced enforcers sent from regional headquarters. The room seemed to go quiet for a moment when they walked in, a hush of confused fear that spread like oil on water. Lowell swallowed hard, still holding the phone. He lowered it slowly, watching them approach, his mouth moving wordlessly as if trying to come up with a lie that would save him. One of the men pointed at him. "Lowell Connors?" Lowell cleared his throat. "Yes, I'm the branch manager. Look, there's been a misunderstanding, I can explain." The man cut him off with a shake of his head. "Corporate wants you out." Now, Lowell's mouth fell open. His face turned a blotchy red. He actually laughed once, a desperate, ugly sound. "You can't be serious. I'm the manager here. I've been with this bank for 22 years. The security man didn't blink. "You're done. Hand over your keys and your ID." The other guard stepped forward, looming. The customers watched in fascinated silence, the tension in the room shifting from anger to rubbernecking curiosity. Lowell's hands trembled as he fumbled at his belt, yanking the keyring free and slamming it on the counter. He tore his plastic badge from his lanyard and threw it too, his face bright red and sweating. "This is insane," he snarled, voice breaking. "She was a scammer. I was protecting the bank. No one told me who she was." The guards didn't care. One put a firm hand on Lowell's arm. "Time to go." Lowell ripped his arm free, straightening his tie with shaking fingers. He turned to the watching customers. "This isn't over," he shouted. "I did nothing wrong." But they didn't answer. They just watched with wide eyes as the guards steered him toward the door. He cast one last furious glare at Deirdre. "This is your fault too," he hissed. Deirdre was frozen at her terminal, shaking so hard she thought she might vomit. She couldn't even muster a retort. Then one of the guards turned to her. "Deirdre O'Malley?" She blinked, unable to process her name at first. "W what?" He pointed at her terminal. "Stand up. You're done here too. Hand in your ID." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. She glanced at the line of customers still waiting, their eyes glued to her in a grotesque theater of her shame. The error message on her screen flashed one last time before going dark completely. She swallowed, her throat clicking painfully. She reached for her badge with trembling fingers and tugged it free. It fell to the counter with a pathetic clack. She pushed her chair back, so fast it nearly tipped over. She stood, her knees wobbling, feeling the entire room's gaze burn into her skin. She could hear someone in line mutter, "Good. Serves her right," and another person snort with vindictive laughter. Her ears burned so hot she thought they might catch fire. She wanted to scream at them all, to explain that she'd just been doing her job, but the words died in her throat. She felt tears well up but blinked them back furiously. The wind slammed into Deirdre's face the second the security door closed behind her, cutting through her cheap coat and making her teeth chatter. She barely felt it. Her mind buzzed with the sound of that final click of the lock, sealing her out forever. She could still hear the echo of customers laughing at her humiliation, Lowell's curses ringing in her ears as he was hauled out before her. She stood frozen on the sidewalk for a long minute, staring down at her empty hands where her badge had been, fingers curling and uncurling around nothing. Tears leaked from her eyes unchecked, hot against her freezing cheeks, and she turned away quickly when a man passing by gave her a dismissive glance. She couldn't stand that look anymore, the same one she'd once given people like Sabine without a second thought. She remembered every snide remark, every smirk, every time she'd made the line laugh at someone else's expense, drunk on the tiny power her counter gave her. Her knees went weak and she sank down onto the curb, hugging herself and sobbing quietly, realizing she had nothing left. No job, no safety net, no justification she believed anymore. She wanted to hate Sabine for what happened, but all she could think about was the look on that woman's face, crushed and desperate, begging for dignity Deirdre wouldn't give. Weeks later, Deirdre still woke up some nights with that face in her dreams, hearing the laughter behind her, the stamp slamming onto the check in her hand. Fake. The word haunted her. She needed money, any money, but the bank wouldn't give her a reference. Word spread fast. No one wanted a liability. Eventually, she found a volunteer gig at a soup kitchen downtown, telling herself it was just to keep busy, but something in her needed to be there. At first she hated it. The smell, the noise, the endless line of tired faces. But soon she noticed how many people looked like Sabine, people she wouldn't have made eye contact with before. She felt her gut twist every time she handed someone a chipped bowl of soup. She started greeting each person with a "Hi, I'm Deirdre. I'm sorry this is happening to you." No one asked her to do it. No one thanked her. She did it anyway. It felt right. There was one woman who caught her eye, standing in line with her 2 kids pressed close for warmth. Deirdre swallowed the lump in her throat and handed her the meal with both hands, voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." The woman blinked, surprised, before nodding and moving on. Deirdre watched them sit on the floor to eat. She felt something break and mend at the same time inside her. Every day she showed up, she kept saying it. "I'm sorry." She didn't know if it helped them. She hoped it helped herself. Lowell's fall was uglier and public. The bank didn't just fire him. It put out a press release naming him and Deirdre as the staff responsible for the incident that lost them their largest investor and tanked their stock. Headlines ran for days about small-town bigotry sinking a century-old institution. He was laughed at on local news. Customers jeered if they saw him on the street. He was forced to sell his car, then his house. He slept on his brother's couch for weeks. At first he raged, cursing Sabine's name, calling her a manipulative fraud, refusing to take any responsibility. But the phone stopped ringing. Friends he'd known for decades stopped returning his calls. No one wanted to be associated with him. He sat up late one night, staring at the screen, watching the stock charts for Centennial Trust's parent company crash and crash, remembering the exact moment corporate had screamed at him over the phone. "Who did you throw out?" One day, he went to a community meeting where a nonprofit was hosting a talk about banking access in black neighborhoods. He sat in the back, arms folded, ready to argue. But the stories hit him one by one. A mother describing being told her check was suspicious in front of her son. An older man explaining he'd never had a line of credit because no one would approve him without a real job. A young woman crying as she described being laughed at for not knowing how to open an account. He felt every word like glass in his gut. He remembered saying them, or worse, thinking them. He didn't stand up at the end. He went home. He sat with it. He hated how it felt, but he didn't want to run from it. He didn't want to be that man anymore. He reached out to the nonprofit. He didn't know what he expected, probably nothing. But they agreed to meet. They talked. They told him they had workshops, but needed volunteers who understood bank procedures. They asked if he'd teach people how to navigate paperwork, avoid fees, avoid scams. He showed up to the first session in an old suit that didn't quite fit anymore. He couldn't meet the class's eyes at first. He cleared his throat. When he finally spoke, his voice shook. "My name is Lowell Connors," he said, voice cracking. "I was a bank manager. I was part of the problem. I treated people like you badly for years. I want to help fix it." The room was silent. No one applauded, but they listened. He taught them how to read the fine print, how to fight overdraft fees, how to ask the right questions, how to protect their money. He answered every question. He stayed late. He stayed the next week and the next. He never forgot the woman he threw out, the one who burned his entire world to the ground with a phone call because she could. He didn't hate her anymore. He thought about her every time someone thanked him for explaining something they were too ashamed to ask before. He hoped somehow she knew he was trying. He didn't think it was enough, but it was what he had. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more powerful narratives about justice, change, and real consequences, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Let us know in the comments what you thought about the plot. Did the twists land for you? Which moment hit hardest? And tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love hearing your perspectives and connecting with readers everywhere. Your feedback makes these stories even better, so don't hold back. Let's talk about it below.